Claire Donovan thought the worst thing that could happen was losing her home in the freezing streets of Chicago until her estranged billionaire father died and left her a remote island no one was supposed to return to. But the moment she and her son step inside the abandoned mansion, Claire realizes the inheritance isn't a fortune, it's bait. And someone is already coming for them. Before we dive deeper into tonight's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel if you enjoy suspenseful stories like this. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more late-night mysteries and thrillers every week. And before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there right now? There's something strangely comforting about knowing who's still awake out there listening together in the dark. The wind coming off Lake Michigan that night didn't feel natural. It felt personal. The kind of cold that slipped through every layer you had on and settled straight into your bones. Claire Donovan stood beneath the flickering awning of a closed pharmacy on the south side of Chicago, pulling her coat tighter around her son while snow mixed with freezing rain soaked through the shoulders of her jacket. Downtown traffic hissed through slush-covered streets nearby, taxis splashing gray water onto the curb as people hurried past, pretending to notice the woman and little boy trying not to freeze 10 feet away from them. Ethan leaned against her side, exhausted, his small hands buried in side sleeves that were too big for him. "Mom," he asked quietly, trying not to cough again, "are we sleeping outside tonight?" Claire looked down at him and forced the kind of smile parents learn to fake when life gets ugly. "No, buddy. The shelter opens in another hour. We okay?" The truth was she had no idea if they were okay anymore. 2 years earlier, Claire had an apartment in Naperville, a steady accounting job, health insurance, and the kind of ordinary life nobody appreciates until it disappears. Then came the layoffs at the investment firm she worked for. Then her mother got sick. Then the hospital bills started stacking faster than she could pay them. By the time the debt collectors began calling every morning, Claire was already drowning. She sold furniture first, then jewelry, then the car. When the eviction notice finally landed on her door, she sat on the kitchen floor staring at it for nearly an hour while Ethan colored dinosaurs beside her, completely unaware that their entire life had just ended. The city changes the way people look at you once you become homeless. Claire learned that quickly. You stop being a person and start becoming part of the background noise. People avoid eye contact, some stare too long. Some act like your bad luck might somehow spread onto them if they stand too close. But Claire didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. Pride didn't keep Ethan warm. Pride didn't buy food. Survival became mathematical after a while. Every dollar mattered. Every hour mattered. Every decision mattered. That night, the temperature had already dropped below 20 degrees, and the shelter on West Roosevelt Road was rumored to be full before sunset. Claire had been mentally preparing herself for another sleepless night on trains or inside 24-hour diners, pretending to drink coffee she couldn't afford, when a black SUV slowly rolled to a stop beside the curb. The vehicle looked absurdly expensive against the dirty snow and graffiti-covered brick walls surrounding them. At first Claire ignored it. Wealthy people didn't stop in neighborhoods like this unless they were lost. Then the passenger door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark wool coat and leather gloves. The kind of polished corporate look Claire hadn't seen up close in years. He scanned the sidewalk once before his eyes landed directly on her. Not beside her. Not near her. Her. Claire immediately pulled Ethan closer. The man approached calmly, carefully avoiding puddles of slush, as if he belonged somewhere warmer than Chicago. "Claire Donovan?" he asked. His voice was controlled, professional, Too calm for this neighborhood. Who's asking? Claire replied. The man reached into his coat and removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. Claire's stomach tightened before she even saw the emblem stamped into it. A silvers. She hadn't seen that symbol in 15 years. My name is Mason Graves, the man said. I represent the Sterling estate. Claire felt something cold settle in her chest. And it had nothing to do with the weather. No, she said immediately, you found the wrong person. I don't believe I did. She stared at the envelope without touching it. Victor Sterling. Even hearing the name in her head still made her jaw tighten. Her father had spent most of his life building luxury hotels, private equity firms, and a reputation for destroying anyone who got in his way. The media called him brilliant. Employees called him terrifying. Claire called him nothing at all, because she stopped speaking to him when she was 21. The last time she saw her father was in a penthouse office overlooking Manhattan. He told her she was wasting her life raising a child instead of chasing ambition. Claire told him money had turned him into a stranger. The argument ended with Victor telling her if she walked out that door, she would do it without his name, his money, or his help. She walked anyway, now standing in frozen Chicago rain beside her exhausted son. Claire wondered for the first time if she'd made the wrong choice. Your father passed away 3 days ago, Mason said. Claire blinked slowly. The words didn't hit all at once. They arrived in pieces. Passed away. Victor Sterling. Dead. He left specific instructions regarding you and your son, Mason continued. There will be a formal reading of the will tomorrow morning in Seattle. Transportation has already been arranged. Claire finally looked up at him. I don't want anything from him. That may not be your decision. Mason handed her the envelope. Even through her gloves, the paper felt expensive. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. But Mason only gave a small polite smile. Be ready by 7 in the morning, Ms. Donovan, someone will come for you. Then he turned and walked back toward the SUV. Claire stood frozen as the vehicle disappeared into traffic, taillights fading into swirling snow. Ethan tugged gently on her sleeve. Mom, who was that? For a moment, Claire didn't answer. She looked down at the envelope again, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a single folded document and a photograph. The document contained only one sentence. Your father left you Greyhaven Island. Claire frowned. Then she looked at the photograph. The image showed a massive estate sitting alone on a rocky island somewhere beneath dark storm clouds. Pine trees surrounded the property like walls. The mansion itself looked less like a home and more like something built to keep the rest of the world out. And the second Claire saw it, an old memory surfaced in the back of her mind. She had been 9 years old the first time her father took her there. She remembered fog. She remembered locked doors. And she remembered hearing Victor Sterling say one sentence very clearly before they left the island forever. Never come back here, Claire, no matter what happens. Standing in the freezing streets of Chicago, with snow falling around her, Claire suddenly realized something terrifying. Her father had spent 15 years making sure nobody could ever find that island again. And now, somehow, he wanted her there. The flight from Chicago to Seattle felt unreal to Claire Donovan. Like she had accidentally stepped into somebody else's life for a few hours. The airline staff smiled at her too much. People offered Ethan snacks. Nobody looked at them with pity. Nobody avoided eye contact. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Claire sat somewhere warm without worrying about being asked to leave. But the strange part was that none of it made her feel better. The entire flight, she kept thinking about the photograph of Greyhaven Island folded inside her coat pocket. Every time she closed her eyes, She saw that mansion again, sitting alone beneath storm clouds, like it had been waiting for her. By the time they landed in Seattle, rain was falling sideways across the runway. Ethan was asleep against her shoulder. When they stepped through the terminal and found Mason Graves waiting near the exit exactly where he said he would be. He looked untouched by the weather, untouched by exhaustion, untouched by life in general. Claire hated that immediately. A black SUV carried them north along the dark coastline for nearly 3 hours. The deeper they drove into Washington state, the more isolated everything became. Gas stations disappeared. Cell service faded in and out. Endless pine forests swallowed the highway on both sides. Ethan slept most of the ride curled beneath a blanket Mason had handed him without a word. Claire watched rain crawl across the window beside her. "You still haven't told me why my father left me that island," she finally said. Mason kept his eyes forward. Mr. Sterling was a complicated man. "That's not an answer." "No," Mason admitted calmly, "it isn't." Claire studied him carefully. There was something about him she couldn't place. Most wealthy men carried arrogance loudly. Mason didn't. His calmness felt different, controlled, measured, like he was constantly deciding how much of himself people were allowed to see. Around midnight, they finally reached a private marina hidden along a narrow stretch of rocky coastline. The rain had become heavier by then, hammering the docks hard enough to sound like static against the water. A single boat waited near the far end of the pier, long, black, expensive. The kind of vessel that belonged to people who disappeared from the public whenever they wanted to. "That's our ride?" Claire asked. Mason nodded once. The crossing took nearly 40 minutes. Ethan stayed asleep below deck, while Claire stood near the cabin window watching dark waves crash against jagged rocks beneath the storm. Somewhere out there, buried beneath fog and freezing rain, was the island her father spent half his life hiding from the world. Then she saw it. At first it looked like nothing more than a shadow rising from the ocean. But as the boat pushed closer through the mist, Greyhaven Island slowly emerged from the darkness. Tall cliffs, dense pine trees, black rock slick with rainwater. And sitting high above everything else, overlooking the ocean like some forgotten fortress, stood Sterling Manor. Claire felt her stomach tighten instantly. The photograph hadn't done it justice. The house was enormous. 3 stories of dark stone and glass built directly into the cliffs themselves. Long narrow windows glowed faintly through the rain. The entire structure looked less like a family home and more like a place somebody built because they expected enemies. "No one lives here now?" Claire asked quietly. Mason's eyes stayed fixed on the island. "Not anymore." The boat docked against a private pier below the estate. The second Claire stepped onto the island, old memories hit her harder than expected. She remembered being a child here, running through endless hallways, hearing arguments late at night behind locked office doors, her father disappearing for hours into parts of the house she was never allowed to enter, and underneath all of it, fear. Not her fear, his. Victor Sterling had been terrified of something on this island. The walk up to the manor took nearly 15 minutes through heavy rain and winding stone paths surrounded by towering pine trees. The air smelled like wet cedar and seawater. Somewhere in the distance, waves crashed violently against the cliffs below. Ethan stayed close beside Claire, still half asleep and clutching her hand tightly. "Mom," he whispered, staring up at the massive house ahead of them, "this place looks haunted." Claire forced a small smile. "Yeah, it kinda does." The front doors opened before they even reached them. An older woman stood inside waiting, thin, gray-haired, sharp posture. She looked more like a retired professor than a housekeeper. "Ms. Donovan," she said politely. "I'm Evelyn. I managed the property for your father." Managed. not worked for. Claire noticed the wording immediately. The inside of Stirling Manor was somehow even stranger than the outside. The house was beautiful, but cold in a way expensive homes usually aren't. Marble floors, massive windows, dark wooden staircases twisting upward into shadows. Every room felt perfectly maintained yet completely lifeless. No family photos, no warmth, no signs that anyone had actually lived there comfortably. Only control. Victor Stirling had controlled everything. Even after death, apparently. Evelyn showed them to their rooms on the second floor. Ethan's bedroom alone was bigger than the apartment they'd lost in Illinois. He wandered slowly through the room, staring at shelves full of books and old ship models near the windows. "Can we really stay here?" he asked softly. Claire looked around the room uneasily. For now, Evelyn informed them dinner had been prepared downstairs if they were hungry, then quietly disappeared down the hallway. The second she left, Claire locked both bedroom doors. Something about the island felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Just watching. Later that night, after Ethan finally fell asleep beneath layers of blankets, Claire wandered downstairs alone. The storm outside had intensified, wind rattling the giant windows overlooking the cliffs. Somewhere deep inside the manor, old pipes groaned softly behind the walls. She found her father's office at the far end of the west wing. The room smelled faintly like cedar smoke and old paper. Bookshelves covered every wall. A massive oak desk sat facing the ocean windows. Everything looked untouched, almost preserved, like nobody had entered since Victor Stirling died. Claire stepped slowly toward the desk. There was only one object sitting on top of it, a small digital recorder. Her heartbeat slowed. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she pressed play. Static crackled softly before her father's voice filled the room. "Claire, if you rehearing this, then I ran out of time." She froze instantly. Victor sounded exhausted, older than she remembered. "There are things hidden on this island that people would kill for. If Mason Graves brought you here, it means they already suspect you know where those things are." Claire's pulse quickened. "What things?" The recording continued. "You cannot trust anyone connected to the mainland, not the lawyers, not the investors. None of them. If you want the truth, you need to find the lower archive beneath the house before they do." Then silence. The recording ended. Claire stared at the device in disbelief. Lower archive. Before she could process the words, every light inside Stirling Manor suddenly flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire house went dark. The silence that followed felt enormous. Outside, thunder rolled across the island. And somewhere below the floorboards beneath her feet, Claire heard a metallic sound echo through the darkness. A heavy door opening. Claire didn't move for several seconds after the lights went out. The darkness inside Stirling Manor felt different from normal darkness, heavy, total. Like the entire house had been swallowed whole the second the power died. Wind slammed against the windows overlooking the cliffs, and somewhere deep in the walls, metal groaned softly as if the island itself were shifting beneath them. Then she heard it again, a low mechanical sound somewhere below the floor. Not thunder, not pipes. A door, slowly opening. Claire grabbed the flashlight sitting on her father's desk and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness in a thin white line, illuminating dust drifting through the office air. Her heartbeat had started climbing now, not because she believed in ghosts or haunted houses, but because instinct told her something was wrong. Deeply wrong. She turned toward the hallway. "Ethan," she called quietly. No answer. Her chest tightened instantly. Claire stepped into the corridor and moved quickly toward the staircase. The entire manor had fallen silent except for the storm outside. No hum from ventilation systems. No electricity. Just rain hammering the glass and the distant roar of ocean waves below the cliffs. "Ethan," she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. By the time she reached the second floor, panic had already started creeping into her voice. She shoved open Ethan's bedroom door. Empty. The blankets were thrown aside, window closed, bathroom empty. Claire's pulse spiked. "Ethan!" A small voice answered from farther down the hallway. "Mom." Relief hit so hard it nearly buckled her knees. She followed the sound and found Ethan standing near the end of the corridor, wearing pajama pants and holding onto the wall nervously. "The lights scared me," he admitted quietly. Claire immediately pulled him close. "Don't do that. Don't disappear like that." "Sorry." She knelt in front of him, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Listen to me carefully, okay? Until I say otherwise, you stay next to me. No wandering around this house alone." Ethan nodded. Another sound echoed downstairs. This time louder. A metallic bang somewhere beneath the manor. Claire slowly looked toward the lower floor. "Was that outside?" Ethan whispered. "No," Claire said softly. It came from underneath them. She led Ethan back toward the main staircase, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. Every instinct told her to lock themselves inside a bedroom and wait for morning. But another part of her, the exhausted survival instinct, built from years of scraping through bad situations, already understood something important. Whatever was happening here had started long before they arrived. And her father knew it would happen. The grand foyer downstairs looked even larger in darkness. Lightning flashed beyond the massive windows, briefly illuminating marble floors and towering staircases before plunging everything black again. Claire swept the flashlight slowly across the room. Nothing moved. Then the beam landed on something strange near the kitchen hallway. A door she hadn't noticed earlier stood partially open. Cold air drifted from inside. Claire frowned. She was almost certain that wall had been solid before. Keeping Ethan behind her, she approached slowly. The hidden doorway led into a narrow concrete stairwell descending beneath the manor. The metallic sound came again from somewhere below. Clang. Then silence. Claire stared downward into darkness. "Mom," Ethan whispered nervously. "Maybe we shouldn't go down there." He was probably right. But before Claire could answer, another sound cut through the house. This one came from outside. An engine. Both of them froze. Claire rushed toward the nearest window overlooking the cliffs. Through rain and darkness, she spotted lights moving below near the private dock. A boat. Someone was arriving at the island. At nearly 1 in the morning. Her stomach dropped immediately. The vessel wasn't Coast Guard, wasn't police. It was long, black, fast, and moving with purpose through rough water. Claire counted at least 3 figures, stepping onto the dock, below wearing dark rain gear. One of them looked familiar. Tall. Calm posture. Mason Graves. "What is he doing here?" Claire whispered. Ethan looked up at her. "I thought he already left." "So did I." Down below, flashlights cut through the rain as the men began climbing the stone path toward the manor. Claire's mind started moving fast now, too fast. Victor's recording. People would kill for what's hidden here. If Mason was coming back in the middle of a storm with armed men, then whatever her father left behind wasn't just money. It was dangerous. "Come on," Claire said quietly. She grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the hidden stairwell before the men outside could reach the house. The concrete steps descended deeper beneath Sterling Manor than she expected. The air became colder with every level, damp metallic. The smell reminded her of server rooms and electrical equipment. At the bottom of the stairs, The flashlight revealed a long underground corridor lined with old pipes and exposed wiring. The walls here looked unfinished compared to the rest of the estate, almost industrial. Then Claire saw the door. Massive steel, half open. And beyond it, light. Dim blue light flickered inside a hidden room beneath the mansion. Claire carefully stepped closer. What she found on the other side stopped her cold. Rows of servers filled the underground chamber from floor to ceiling. Black cabinets blinking with tiny green and blue lights. Cooling fans hummed softly in the darkness. Backup batteries lined the far wall beside satellite communication equipment and monitors displaying encrypted financial data. The room looked less like a secret vault and more like a private intelligence operation. Mom, Ethan whispered, "What is all this?" Claire didn't answer immediately. Because she already knew. Her father hadn't hidden money on this island. He'd hidden information. And information was far more dangerous. She slowly approached the nearest monitor. Thousands of files covered the screen. Offshore accounts, transaction records, audio recordings, surveillance photos, politicians, CEOs, judges. Names she recognized instantly from television and newspapers. Victor Sterling had spent decades collecting blackmail material on some of the most powerful people in America. A sudden voice echoed from above them, through hidden speakers somewhere in the ceiling. "Claire!" She spun instantly. Mason Graves' voice. Calm as ever. "You really shouldn't have gone down there." Claire looked upward, heart pounding. The intercom crackled softly. "I tried to avoid this," Mason continued. "But your father made things unnecessarily complicated before he died." Claire pulled Ethan behind her. "What do you want?" she demanded. A long pause followed. Then Mason answered quietly. "The same thing everyone else wants, the archive." Lightning flashed outside somewhere above them, and for the first time since arriving on Greyhaven Island, Claire realized the truth. Her father hadn't left her an inheritance. He had left her in the middle of a war. Claire's first instinct was to smash every server in the underground archive and run. She didn't care about offshore accounts, billionaire secrets, or whatever twisted game her father had been playing before he died. She cared about one thing only: getting Ethan off Greyhaven Island alive. But survival had taught her something important over the years. Panic gets people killed. Calm keeps them breathing. The hidden server room hummed softly around them, while rain pounded somewhere far above the estate. Ethan stood close against her side, clutching her arm hard enough to hurt. Claire could hear Mason Graves moving through the manor upstairs now. Slow footsteps. No rush. No panic. The kind of confidence only dangerous people carried. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "is he gonna hurt us?" Claire looked down at him and lied immediately. "No." The intercom crackled again overhead. "Your father made a mistake before he died," Mason said calmly. "He believed he could expose people like this and survive the fallout. He couldn't." Claire stared at the blinking monitors in front of her. "Who are you people?" A faint chuckle came through the speaker. "That's the problem, Claire. There is no you people. Politicians, banks, intelligence contractors, corporate firms, everyone protects everyone once enough money gets involved. Your father spent 20 years collecting insurance files against men who thought they were untouchable." Claire's eyes drifted across the screens again. Some of the names displayed there made her stomach turn. U.S. senators, hedge fund executives, federal contractors. One folder even contained surveillance photos, taken inside what looked like a private government fundraiser. Victor Sterling hadn't just been rich. He'd been building leverage. Blackmail leverage. And somehow, before dying, he decided to hand the entire nightmare to his daughter. "You should walk away," Mason continued. "Take your son and leave the archive alone." "I can still make that happen." Claire almost laughed at that. You came to the island with armed men in the middle of the night, she snapped. And I'm supposed to trust you. Silence. Then Mason answered quietly, no. You shouldn't trust anyone anymore. The intercom clicked dead. Claire immediately started moving. She grabbed Ethan's hand and scanned the room quickly for another exit. The underground archive stretched farther back than she originally realized. Additional hallways branched deeper beneath the estate besides storage rooms filled with backup generators and networking equipment. One thing became obvious immediately. Victor Sterling built this place expecting an attack someday. Stay close, Claire whispered. They moved through the dim corridors while the sound of footsteps echoed faintly above them through the ceiling. Somewhere upstairs, doors opened and shut inside the manor. Mason's men were searching room by room. Claire suddenly remembered something from childhood, a memory buried for years. She was maybe 10 years old, standing outside her father's office while two men argued inside. She remembered Victor saying one sentence clearly. If they ever find the archive, the island locks down automatically. At the time she didn't understand what he meant. Now she might. Claire hurried back toward the central server terminal and began searching through the monitors. Most screens required passwords, but one dashboard remained unlocked. Security systems, generator controls, ventilation systems, emergency protocols. Then she found it. Lockdown sequence. Her pulse quickened. The protocol would automatically seal every lower access point beneath Sterling Manor using reinforced steel doors originally designed for storms and intrusions. But there was a warning beneath it. Manual release required from Central Control Room, meaning once activated, whoever got trapped downstairs stayed trapped. Mom, Ethan whispered nervously, someone's coming. Claire looked toward the hallway. Footsteps. Closer now. She quickly pulled Ethan behind one of the server rows and killed her flashlight. Seconds later, beams of white light swept across the underground corridor outside. Two men entered. Dark tactical jackets, suppressed rifles, professional movement. Claire held her breath. One of them spoke quietly into a radio, lower level secure. No visual yet. The second man scanned the server room slowly. They're down here somewhere. Ethan trembled beside her. Claire wrapped one hand gently around the back of his neck, trying to steady him without making noise. Her mind raced desperately for options. Fighting wasn't possible. Running wouldn't last long underground. Then she noticed something near the base of the server racks. Cooling pipes. Industrial water lines connected to the emergency fire suppression system. An idea formed instantly. Dangerous. But possible. Claire leaned close to Ethan's ear. When I say run, you run toward that hallway behind us and don't stop. Okay? His eyes widened. What about you? I'll be right behind you. She hoped that was true. The guards moved deeper into the room. Closer. Closer. Claire reached slowly toward the nearby maintenance valve attached to the cooling system. Then she twisted it open as hard as she could. The pipe exploded instantly. Freezing water blasted across the server room under enormous pressure, hammering equipment and flooding the floor within seconds. Sparks erupted overhead as electrical systems shorted violently. The guards shouted in surprise, while lights flickered wildly throughout the underground bunker. Run! Claire yelled. She shoved Ethan toward the hallway while chaos erupted behind them. One guard slipped hard against the flooding floor, crashing into server racks as sparks rained from exposed wiring. Alarms suddenly screamed through the entire estate. Lockdown warning. Lockdown warning. Red emergency lights flashed across the underground corridors. Claire grabbed Ethan and sprinted deeper into the bunker, while steel blast doors began sliding shut throughout the lower level. Somewhere behind them, Mason shouted orders through the radio with sudden urgency for the first time all night. Good. Let him panic. The corridor ahead split in two directions. Claire chose blindly, pulling Ethan through narrow concrete hallways while emergency sirens echoed overhead. The farther they ran, the older the underground structure became. These tunnels weren't part of the luxury estate above. They looked military, reinforced walls, old wiring, emergency storage rooms. Then Claire found the final room. The central archive vault. Unlike the server room, this chamber looked almost untouched. Filing cabinets lined the walls beside shelves of physical documents and backup hard drives. In the center of the room sat a single wooden desk. And on that desk, another recorder. Claire stared at it, then pressed play. Her father's voice filled the room once more. Claire, if you found this, then Mason is already hunting you. Victor sounded tired, defeated. I need you to understand something before this goes any further. I was never trying to become rich. I was trying to survive. Claire felt her throat tighten. The people connected to those files, they destroy anyone who threatens them. Judges, reporters, whistleblowers, entire companies disappear overnight. I gathered evidence because I thought someday somebody honest could expose them. He paused. But I was wrong. There are no honest people left inside that system. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Outside the vault, distant footsteps echoed again through the tunnels. Closer. Victor's voice continued. I kept you away because I knew eventually they'd come after my family too. If you rehearing this now, then I failed. For the first time in years, Claire heard something in her father's voice she never thought possible. Regret. Then the recording ended with one final sentence. Burn the archive, Claire, before it destroys you too. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked up at her quietly. What do we do now? Claire stared at the blinking hard drives surrounding them. Everything her father feared lived inside these walls. Enough evidence to destroy powerful people. Enough motive to get her son killed. Then somewhere deep in the underground bunker, Mason Graves finally found them. Claire, his voice echoed calmly through the corridor outside, this is your last chance. Claire could hear Mason Graves walking slowly through the underground corridor outside the archive vault. No panic in his footsteps, no anger, just patience. That somehow made him scarier than the armed men he brought to the island. The emergency lights overhead continued flashing red across the concrete walls, while water dripped steadily somewhere deeper in the bunker from the damaged cooling pipes. Ethan stood close beside her, exhausted and pale, trying hard not to cry. Claire, Mason called again from the darkness beyond the vault door. You know how this ends. She looked around the room one last time, hard drives, paper files. Decades of evidence hidden beneath Greyhaven Island. Enough corruption buried in those servers to collapse careers, companies, maybe even governments. Victor Sterling had spent years building this archive because he believed information could protect him. Instead, it got him killed. Claire finally understood that now. She turned toward the central terminal near the desk and saw something she'd missed before. A small satellite uplink system connected directly to the archive servers. Beside it sat a blinking green indicator. Active connection available. Her pulse quickened. Victor had built a dead man switch, a way to release everything if the island was ever compromised. Mom, Ethan whispered nervously. What are you doing? Claire stared at the upload controls, ending this. Outside the vault, Mason stopped walking. You send those files out, he said calmly. And every person connected to them becomes desperate overnight. Desperate people don't stop hunting threats, Claire. Maybe they should. Vi thought about that before ruining people's lives. You think the FFB protects people from men like this? Mason asked. You still believe the world works that way? Claire didn't answer because part of her knew he might be right. But another part of her was simply tired. Tired of rich men destroying lives while everyone else paid for it. Tired of fear controlling every room she walked into. Tired of Ethan growing up believing survival was the same thing as living. Her father spent decades hiding. Claire wasn't going to. She pressed the upload button. Immediately, the terminal screens came alive. Progress bars appeared across multiple monitors as encrypted files began transmitting through the satellite system. Financial records, surveillance archives, offshore accounts, audio recordings. Thousands of documents flooding out into the world all at once. Outside the vault, Mason finally lost his composure. You have no idea what you just started, he snapped. Then Claire heard him running. Not walking anymore. Running. She grabbed Ethan's hand immediately. Move. The vault had another exit tunnel in the rear maintenance section leading upward toward the manor above. Claire shoved open the steel door and pulled Ethan into the narrow stairwell just as Mason reached the archive room behind them.
Claire!
Gunshots exploded through the bunker. Concrete chipped beside the doorway as bullets tore through the corridor. Ethan screamed. Claire dragged him upward 2 steps at a time while alarms echoed throughout the underground structure. Then suddenly, the entire island went dark again. Complete blackout. The servers below shut down instantly. Emergency systems died. For one terrifying second, the only sound anywhere was the storm outside crashing against the cliffs. Then backup generators kicked on. Dim emergency lighting returned across the stairwell in weak yellow flashes. Claire reached the upper level of Sterling Manor breathless, pulling Ethan into one of the long West Wing hallways. Wind howled violently through broken windows somewhere downstairs. Rainwater had begun leaking across parts of the marble floor. The mansion itself almost sounded alive now, groaning beneath the weight of the storm. Behind them, Mason emerged from the underground stairwell holding a pistol. Claire froze. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Mason looked exhausted for the first time since she met him. His jacket was soaked. Blood trickled from a cut near his temple, but his eyes remained calm, cold. You should burn the archive, he said quietly. Claire stepped in front of Ethan instinctively. Maybe somebody finally needed to see the truth. Mason shook his head slowly. Truth doesn't matter to people like this, only leverage. Lightning flashed through the massive windows, surrounding the hallway, illuminating both of them in harsh white light. Somewhere outside, thunder shook the island hard enough to rattle the glass. Then Mason lowered the gun slightly. And for the first time all night, he looked genuinely tired. You know what your father's biggest mistake was? He asked. Claire said nothing. He thought exposing corruption would fix the system. But corruption is the system. Another sound suddenly interrupted him. Helicopters. Distant at first. Then louder. Mason heard them too. His expression changed instantly. Claire looked toward the windows overlooking the cliffs. Through the storm clouds, flashing lights were cutting across the darkness above Greyhaven Island. Federal helicopters. The upload worked. Mason closed his eyes briefly, almost amused. Victor really did plan everything. Then something unexpected happened. He lowered the pistol completely. You should leave the country, he said quietly. Claire frowned. What? You think tonight ends this? Mason asked. There are people connected to those files you'll never hear about on the news. People who won't go to prison. People who don't lose. The helicopters grew louder overhead now. Searchlights swept across the estate grounds. Mason glanced once toward the windows, then back at Claire. When they come through that door, tell them you never saw me. Before Claire could respond, he disappeared down the opposite hallway. Gone. Seconds later, floodlights blasted through the windows as federal agents stormed Sterling Manor from every entrance. Voices shouted across the house. Boots thundered against marble floors. Ethan buried his face against Claire's side, while armed agents rushed into the hallway aiming rifles. Federal agents? Hands where we can see them. Claire slowly raised her hands. And for the first time in years, she stopped running. The next 48 hours passed in fragments, interviews, hospitals, FBI briefings. News coverage exploding across every television screen in America. Entire financial firms became targets of federal investigations overnight after the archive files leaked publicly through multiple encrypted channels. Politicians denied involvement, CEOs vanished behind legal teams. Arrest warrants spread across several states before sunrise. Victor Sterling became front page news again, even in death. But the strangest part for Claire was how quickly the world moved on. After a week, another scandal replaced it. After 2 weeks, people stopped talking about Greyhaven Island entirely, but Claire never forgot it. 6 months later, she stood in the kitchen of a quiet rental home outside Seattle watching Ethan laugh in the backyard while throwing a tennis ball for an old golden retriever they'd adopted from a shelter. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Dinner simmered on the stove. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. For the first time in years, life felt still. The government eventually awarded Claire immunity and substantial compensation for exposing the archive network. Most of the money went into trust funds and legal protections for Ethan. The rest she quietly used to disappear from public attention. As for Greyhaven Island, she sold the property to a non-profit organization that converted Sterling Manor into a protected housing center for women and children escaping domestic abuse and homelessness. Claire never stepped foot on the island again after signing the papers. Some places deserve to stay in the past. Late one night, after Ethan had gone to sleep, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table, scrolling absently through emails on her laptop, when she noticed a new message sitting unread in her inbox. No sender. No subject line. Her chest tightened instantly. Slowly, she opened it. There was only one sentence inside. You were warned. Claire stared at the screen without moving. Then, outside the front window, headlights slowly appeared across the street. A black SUV sat idling quietly beneath the rain, watching the house. And this time, Claire understood something her father learned far too late. Once you see how power really works, you can never unsee it again. Claire closed the laptop slowly and stared at the black SUV parked across the street. Rain slid down the window beside her, while the engine continued idling in the dark. Upstairs, Ethan was asleep for the first time in weeks without fear. Safe, warm, finally home. For a long moment, Claire considered turning off the lights and pretending she hadn't seen the message. But then she remembered something her father once told her when she was a little girl. The dangerous people aren't the ones hiding in the dark. Claire, they are the ones who think nobody will ever stand against them. Outside, the SUV headlights suddenly switched off. And in the silence that followed, Claire realized the nightmare on Greyhaven Island was over. But the war behind it had only just begun. I think the real reason stories like this stay with us isn't because of the money, the conspiracy, or even the danger. It's because deep down, most people understand what it feels like to carry pain that didn't start with them. Claire inherited far more than an island from her father. She inherited fear, secrets, trauma, and the consequences of choices she never made. And honestly, that part feels very real to life. A lot of people spend years trying to survive situations they never asked for. Sometimes it's family problems, sometimes poverty, betrayal, loss, or simply growing up around people who taught you to live in fear instead of peace. And one of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that even though the damage may not be your fault, healing still becomes your responsibility. What I admire most about Claire isn't that she became rich in the end. It's that she refused to become like the people who hurt her. She had every reason to stay angry, bitter, paranoid, and closed off from the world. Instead, she chose to protect her son. She chose to tell the truth even when it terrified her. And most importantly, she chose to break the cycle instead of continuing it. I also think this story says something important about power. The world often teaches us that powerful people are untouchable, that money can bury truth forever, and that ordinary people can't fight systems bigger than themselves. But history has always shown the opposite. Real change usually begins with one exhausted person finally deciding they were no longer willing to stay silent. And maybe the biggest lesson of all is this: survival and living are not the same thing. For years, Claire survived. She slept in shelters, counted every dollar, and lived day to day just trying to make it to tomorrow. But by the end of the story, she finally understood something many people spend their whole lives chasing. Peace is not about how much money you have. It's about feeling safe enough to breathe again, safe enough to trust, safe enough to believe the future might actually hold something better. Sometimes the strongest people are not the loudest ones or the richest ones. Sometimes they are just the people who refuse to give up when life gives them every reason to. And honestly, I think we all need that reminder once in a while.